everyone, this is Lori from the Crafting Auntie. Welcome back to my channel. This video is still in collaboration with Pam at Nana's Crafting Cottage. And we decided to do a project that we would not tell each other what we would do. So I decided to create a tag. And so I'm going to be using some embossing powders, and I'm going to be also using a hardcover tag in which I am going to cover it with some Tim Holtz paper. And what I've done is cut a piece for the front, and I've used the same paper that I will put on the back. So I'm showing you here what I'm going to be using. And then I'm also going to be using this vintage metal clock face, and I want to do a little bit of embossing on it. I'm also using a piece of this ruler, and I'm going to emboss on that a little bit and vintage it up. I'm also going to be using one of these, I think it's jelly bean. They're like a shaker cover that will go over the top of this vintage clock. So I'm just showing you here some of the items that I'm going to be using. And then I'm going to be doing also a Tim Holtz paper doll. I'm going to emboss it is some frosted crystal, which gives it kind of a little bit of a dreamy look. I'm also using this timber, which is I received at a Scrapbook Expo a few years back, and it gives it kind of a cool vintage brown, several different tones of embossing powder. So I want to do some on the clock face. I want to do some on the piece of ruler. So here I am getting ready to do the the paper doll, and I'm using the Tim Holtz embossing dabber for the liquid. So I'm putting that all over that. And with this embossing powder, you don't want to heat it a really long time because it does take on a different effect. So if you want to have just kind of it look like a frosted color, then just emboss it until it looks like it's been completely heated. I store my dabber upside down so that it's always wet and available here. So I'm just going to transfer this to a piece of another paper and add the embossing powder. Then I'm going to use some tweezers and pick that piece up and then tap off all the excess on the embossing powder. And just be careful when you do it not to touch the front. There's a little bit of a spot there that it didn't look like it got enough liquid on it. I'm trying to tap a little bit more on there, and then we'll see how it looks when it's done. So I'm setting that aside so I can clean up my paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and place it on another sheet, and then I'm going to use my heat tool, which is a Tim Holtz heat tool, and I'm going to heat up the item and get the embossing powder to melt and do what it's supposed to do. So just be careful when you do it, just don't overdo it. It takes a few minutes, so just keep heating it up until you get the look that you've got, and just make sure you don't overheat it. So you can see I am just making sure it's all heated. Be careful when you pick it up. It is a little warm, but it gives it a different look. It's kind of hard to see in the camera, but that is finished. And then now I'm going to go ahead and do the timber embossing powder onto the ruler, and I'm just doing it in various places and on the ends. I don't want it to look perfect. I just want to add some embossing powder to it just to give it a little bit of a vintage look. So I've done it on both ends, and then I've just done it in a few spots on the top and the bottom part of the ruler. So when I add the embossing powder on, you'll be able to see the difference and where the embossing powder is going. So here I'm just shaking it on. It's hard to pick up when you've got all the powder on it. Just be careful. Tap off the excess. You can kind of see where I put it. So it's just going to give it a little bit of a vintage look. So I'm going to set that onto another sheet. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the clock face next. It's always important to put your embossing powders away in between projects so that when you heat it up, it doesn't get all over the paper. And maybe your item sticks to the paper. So that's why it's good to have another sheet to set it on. So here I just added some of the embossing liquid onto just parts of the clock. Again, it's a vintage clock face, but I'm just adding a little bit more to it. And then put the embossing powder away. And I'm just going to use the heat tool again and heat both of the pieces up. Now be careful when you go to pick these up because they will be hot, especially the metal piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and get those all embossed, and then I'll show you what they look like when they're all heated up. And this embossing powder takes just a little bit longer to emboss, so just keep heating it and it'll turn really kind of shiny, and you'll get various color tones in it once it is complete. So just keep heating it until you've got that effect, and then check it and see if you need anything else on there. It will turn shiny. When it goes on, it just kind of looks like granules, but once it melts, it looks completely different. So just make sure you get all of it heated good. So this is a little bit warm, but that's what it looks like once it's done. So it gives it a shimmer. Just make sure it's all embossed. I see I had a couple places here I needed to reheat a little bit, just to make sure that it is all embossed. So I've got that all done. Putting things away so that I have a clear working area again. And so now I'm going to be doing some stitching. And I'm going to stitch on the papers before they get glued down to the tag, and also on that frame itself. So I'm going to stitch around all of that. And here I have it all stitched, and I've used kind of a cream color thread so it's hard to see, but I didn't want to go real dark. I wanted to have a little bit of a contrast. I know it's hard to see in the camera, but it is there. And so now I'm going to be using Scorched Timber Distress Ink from Tim Holtz, and I'm going to go around the base tag. And this came exactly as it is. I believe it was something that I picked up at Michael's at one time where they had already prepped tags, and it's pretty thick. So it made for a nice base for this. So I'm just inking around all of that, also around the frame. And then also I will ink around the front piece and the back piece that's going to go onto the tag, just to give it a grungy look. So all of this is being done with the Scorched Timber Distress Oxide from Tim Holtz. Once I get the inking done, then I will be beginning to assemble the tag. I had done something similar to this sometime, probably a year and a half ago, using a different style of a plastic shaker. I'm using art glitter glue for all the gluing down and making sure all the edges are covered so that my tag will be secured to the base tag. I'm just lining it up and pressing that down, making sure it's on there straight and that it's all covered. Now I'm going to do the back, same thing. I'm just using the opposite side of the paper, and I'm making sure I do put the glue around all the stitching. Sometimes the stitching will cause it to not adhere as well, so I make sure I add extra glue there so that it is secured down to the tag. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to begin assembling. So I want the frame to hang off a little bit, and then I want to add the ruler. And my paper doll is going to be sitting on the ruler in front of the frame. It kind of lays back a little bit, so I want to make sure I have something underneath it so that when the paper doll is on there, she sits flush. So I'm just figuring out my arrangement here. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue down the frame, putting my finger where I don't want to put the glue. And then putting it in position where I want it to be. I did leave some of the threads hanging because I do like the texture. So I'm just going to place the frame on here. It will pop off to the right of the tag. Press that down good, and then kind of figure out where I want to put my clock. Just kind of get an idea. And where she is going to sit, I'm going to take one of the small gears that has a little bit of height to it, and that will support her from behind. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down that piece of ruler. And that was just some wood rulers that I got off of Amazon. I had my husband cut them in half lengthwise, and then I just break off pieces as I'm going to be using it. And then I just vintage it up, distress it however I want to, and use them in projects. So just make sure it's pressed down good. So this is how it looks so far. And she's going to be sitting right there in front. Now I got to figure out how my clock is going to look. So that will have the jelly bean shaker over the clock, and then I did cut a separate ring, and I also cut a piece for the backing of the clock because the ring was just a little bit larger than the actual clock. So I wanted to make sure that that was taken care of. So I did use a piece of like a copper color of glitter paper. And I'm going to add the hands to the clock. So I'm just using a pokey tool to put a hole into the center, put in on the clock hands that I'm showing here, and then using a brad to secure it in the back. Press those down good, and then that is going to be how my clock will look like, which will be just to the left of her. I'm just seeing if I need to build it up at all using another gear, but no, it's not necessary, and it was making it wobble a little bit. So I think that's where I want the position, and then this will go over the top. So I'm going to glue this down. And I'm still going to use the art glitter glue for all of this. And just make sure you have enough on there. As I'm gluing this down, I do find that I need to add a little bit more. I need to also add clamps. The first clamp I put on really wasn't big enough. I used a smaller clamp, and so it was harder for the glue to take hold. So I'm having to hold it here and get it in position the way I want it. And as I'm holding it, I'm still having issues of it gluing down. So I'm just continuing to press on that. So just takes a little bit of patience to make sure that everything will stay in place. So while I'm holding that down, I'm going to go ahead and glue down that gear that's going to support her from behind. So I'm just going to add some glue there and add the gear on. And then because that small clamp kept lifting up the clock, even though I continue pressing it down, I eventually take that off and continue pressing it down, but I was still having some difficulty getting that on there. So it took a lot of patience for this. And I decided to go for a larger clamp, and I decided that I better put some more glue on and then use the larger clamp to put in place. So I added glue both back to the back of the clock and onto the tag itself. And then I'm using this larger clamp that goes over the almost 3/4 of the way of the clock to put that in place. So that made all the difference in the world. So now I can continue working on putting her in place. So kind of getting the idea of where she's going to go and adding glue to the ruler and also to her and making sure I get that in position. And just pressing her in place. And once she was secured down, then this is how it looks so far. I'm happy with it. I like all the different textures we have going on in this with the stitching and the embossing and the gears and the clock. So we have a lot of various, and the ruler, we have a lot of various textures going on. So I've just pressed her down a little bit more. So I'm just letting that clock continue to dry, and I'm taking some more gears that I have. Some are Tim Holtz gears, some are gears that I also got from Amazon. So I have previously in prior projects done some embossing on some of the tiny gears because they were silver. And so I did use that same timber. So I'm just kind of placing these around to see what do I like, what places I want to put them, and also making sure everything is secured down. So I think my clock is dry. So I'm going to remove that clamp, and everything seems to be secured now. So I want to put the top of the jelly bean plastic top on. It does have a adhesive on the back, but I did decide I wanted to add a little bit more glue to make sure that it would stay secure onto the top of where my clock is. So I added some glitter glue, and I'm just trying to position that in place. And again, just take your time with this. Just get it exactly the way you want it. Make sure it's sticking down good. I had that ruler there, so I had to kind of work with it, make sure I got it down flat a little bit underneath the ruler. So yeah, just keep pushing on it and get it secure. And then this ring, I did use a die set that I have of circles, and I just determined which one would go around the top of the plastic jelly bean shaker cover, and then I used a smaller one just underneath it, and then that, or a larger one, excuse me, a little bit larger one, and then created that ring. So again, I am pressing that down, making sure all of that is secure. With the frame that is to the right and the ruler at the bottom, I'm having to just really make sure that it is pressed in place here. So just take your time. Sorry, I had to get a little closer to see what was going on. So you can see my head in the way there. Okay, I think I've got that secured now, so I can continue on my tag. So again, I'm going to place some of the gears around where I want them. And I also have this 49 in market, and these are metal index tabs. So I want to add one just because I want to add additional metal items to this. And so I'm just going to put this onto the side. It's a little tight fit right now because of all the layers I have. So I'm just going to loosen it up just a little bit with my fingers, just so I can get it onto the side there. And you can add a label in there, or you can just leave it as is with just a metal decoration. I just want it as a metal decoration. Again, I'm just making sure that ring is down. As the glue begins to dry, it's a lot easier to push that down and it'll stay in place. So again, here I am placing some of the rings in various areas. I want to add some onto the ruler, below the ruler, above the frame, and so I've got several pieces out, and I'm just kind of placing them where I want them. And then I will glue them down again with the art glitter glue. So just add the glue all around your metal piece, and then put it down. And they usually work really well with the art glitter glue, but whatever glue you have, just put it on there and let them dry. So I'm just adding some glue to all the various pieces and putting them in place. Some of the smaller ones, I'll just add glue to the area that I'm going to place it. And you can put as many as you want on here. I just am just putting them in various areas just to give it some character. Again, all the different textures that are on this tag really make the tag itself. And so here is what it looks like so far. I have one there I have not glued down. I don't realize it at the moment. So my strings are just a little bit stuck there, so I'm just going to take some scissors and just cut that apart. And that way I still got the string texture there. And so I'm going to go ahead and use my crocodile. I'm going to punch a hole at the top. I'm using the large setting on this. I've just noticed that I did not secure that one gear, so I'm trying to figure out where I do want to put it. And I decided to put it down. It needed another one down onto the ruler piece. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that down now. And now I'm going to grab some of my eyelets and also some chain. So I typically use the dark eyelets. I'm going to use that again on this tag. Just making sure everything is secured. And that all is glued down good. And then this is just some chain. I believe this is a Tim Holtz chain. So I'm picking some out of there, and I want to cut a piece to go up through the hole where the eyelet is. And then I'm going to add a dangle charm. And it's again one of the Tim Holtz round charms. And I'm just grabbing the small little metal pieces that secure the chain together. So I'm getting those so that I can add that to my chain that will secure it to the top of my tag through the eyelet. These are the tiny metal pieces. I don't know what they're called, but you use them on this type of chain. So I'm just pressing it on one side. And then I'm adding my charm, which says breathe, and it has a number on it. And again, it's one of the Tim Holtz. Feeding the chain through it, and then up through the eyelet, and then securing it again into that metal piece to hold the pieces together. And that will just dangle down. So that is the complete tag We have lots of metal pieces. We have our paper doll. We have the Tim Holtz paper along with the Tim Holtz frame. And I have a vintage clock face. So that's the project for today. So you guys have a great day. Bye.